But I tell you, Jesus says, that something greater than the temple is here. Matthew 12. 5, 6. Numbers 28. 9. Jesus again draws on the scriptures to make his point. If you had understood what this means, I want mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless ones. He concludes, for the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Jesus is referring to his coming peaceful kingdom rule of 1,000 years. Matthew 12. 7, 8. Hosea 6. 6. Humankind has long been suffering laborious enslavement by Satan, with violence and war abounding. What a contrast it will be under the great Sabbath rule of Christ, who will provide the time of rest we long for and need. Disciples pluck grain on the Sabbath. Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath. The Pharisees make what charge against Jesus' disciples, and why? How does Jesus correct the Pharisees' view? In what way is Jesus Lord of the Sabbath? 31:77. On another Sabbath, Jesus visits a synagogue, likely in Galilee. There he finds a man whose right hand is withered. Luke 6. 6. The scribes and the Pharisees are watching Jesus closely. Why? They reveal what their real intent is when they ask, is it lawful to cure on the Sabbath? Matthew 12. 10. The Jewish religious leaders believe that healing is lawful on the Sabbath only if life is in danger. Thus, for example, on the Sabbath it is unlawful to set a bone or bandage a sprain, conditions that are not life-threatening. Clearly the scribes and the Pharisees are not questioning Jesus, because they feel genuine concern for this poor man's suffering. They are trying to find a pretext for condemning Jesus. Jesus, however, knows their twisted reasoning. He realizes that they have adopted an extreme, unscriptural view of what constitutes a violation of the prohibition against doing work on the Sabbath. Exodus 20. 8-10. He has already faced such misplaced criticism of his good works. Now Jesus sets the stage for a dramatic confrontation by telling the man with the withered hand, get up and come to the center. Mark 3. 3. Turning to the scribes and the Pharisees, Jesus says, if you have one sheep and that sheep falls into a pit on the Sabbath, is there a man among you who will not grab hold of it and lift it out? Matthew 12. 11. A sheep represents a financial investment, so they would not leave it in the pit until the next day. It might die in the meantime and thus cause them loss. Besides, the scriptures say, the righteous one takes care of his domestic animals. Proverbs 12. 10. Drawing a reasonable parallel, Jesus continues, how much more valuable is a man than a sheep? So it is lawful to do a fine thing on the Sabbath. Matthew 12. 12. Accordingly, Jesus would not be violating the Sabbath by healing the man. The religious leaders are unable to refute such logical, compassionate reasoning. They just remain silent. With indignation, as well as grief at their misguided thinking, Jesus looks around. Then he says to the man, stretch out your hand. Matthew 12. 13. As the man stretches out his withered hand, it is restored. That is a cause for joy for the man, but how does it affect those trying to trap Jesus? Instead of being happy that the man's hand is restored, the Pharisees go out and immediately conspire with the party followers of Herod against Jesus, in order to kill him. Mark 3. 6. This political party evidently includes members of the religious group called the Sadducees. Ordinarily, the Sadducees and the Pharisees are opposed to each other, but now they are solidly united in their opposition to Jesus. What is lawful on the Sabbath? Matthew 12. 9-14. Mark 3. 1-6. Luke 6. 6-11, 78. Healing a man's hand on the Sabbath. What is the setting for a confrontation between Jesus and Jewish religious leaders? The Jewish religious leaders have what wrong view of the Sabbath law? How does Jesus wisely refute wrong views about the Sabbath? 32:79. Upon learning that the Pharisees and the party followers of Herod planned to kill him, Jesus and his disciples withdraw to the Sea of Galilee. Great crowds flock to him from all over. From Galilee, the coastal cities of Tyre and Sidon, the eastern side of the Jordan River, Jerusalem, and Idumea farther south. Jesus cures many. As a result, those with serious diseases press forward. Not waiting for him to touch them, they eagerly reach out to touch him. Mark 3. 9, 10. The crowds are so large that Jesus tells his disciples to get a small boat ready for him so that he can pull away from shore and keep the crowds from pressing in on him. Also, he can teach them from the boat or move to another area along the shore to help more people. The disciple Matthew notes that Jesus' activity fulfills what was spoken through Isaiah the prophet. Matthew 12. 17. What prophecy is Jesus here fulfilling? Look, my servant whom I chose, my beloved, whom I have approved. I will put my spirit upon him, and what justices he will make clear to the nations. He will not quarrel nor cry aloud, nor will anyone hear his voice in the main streets. No bruised reed will he crush, and no smouldering wick will he extinguish, until he brings justice with success. Indeed, in his name nations will hope. Matthew 12. 18-21. Isaiah 42. 1-4. Jesus, of course, is the beloved servant whom God approves. Jesus makes clear what is true justice, which is being obscured by false religious traditions. Unjustly applying God's law in their own way, the Pharisees will not even come to a sick person's aid on the Sabbath. Making evident God's justice and showing that God's Spirit is upon him, Jesus relieves people of the burden of unjust traditions. For that the religious leaders want to kill him. How deplorable. What does it mean that he will not quarrel nor cry aloud, nor will anyone hear his voice in the main streets? When curing people, Jesus does not allow them, or the demons, to make him known. Mark 3. 12. He does not want people to learn about him through noisy advertising in the streets, or through distorted reports that are excitedly passed from mouth to mouth. Also, Jesus carries his comforting message fulfilling Isaiah's prophecy. Matthew 12. 15-21. Mark 3. 7-12. 80. To those who are figuratively like a bruised reed, bent over and knocked down. They are like a smouldering wick, whose last spark of life has nearly flickered out. Jesus does not crush the bruised reed or quench the flickering, smoking flax. Rather, with tenderness and love, he skillfully lifts up the meek. Truly, Jesus is the one in whom the nations can hope. Crowds press in on Jesus. He fulfills Isaiah's prophecy. How does Jesus make justice clear without quarreling or crying aloud in the main streets? Who are like bruised reeds and smouldering wicks, and how does Jesus treat them? 33:81. It has been about a year and a half since John the Baptist introduced Jesus as the Lamb of God. As Jesus began his public ministry, a number of sincere men became his disciples, such as Andrew, Simon Peter, John, perhaps James John's brother, Philip, and Bartholomew, also called Nathanael. In time, many others joined in following Christ. John 1. 45-47. Now Jesus is ready to select his apostles. These will be his close associates and will receive special training. But before selecting them, Jesus goes out to a mountain, perhaps one near the Sea of Galilee not far from Capernaum. He spends a whole night in prayer, likely asking for wisdom and God's blessing. The next day he calls his disciples to him and chooses 12 of his disciples as apostles. Jesus selects the 6 named at the outset, as well as Matthew, whom Jesus called from the tax office. The other 5 chosen are Judas, also called Thaddeus, and the son of James, Simon the Canaanian, Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, and Judas Iscariot. Matthew 10. 2-4. Luke 6. 16. By now these 12 have traveled with Jesus, and he knows them well. A number of them are his relatives. The brothers James and John are evidently Jesus' first cousins. And if, as some think, Alphaeus was the brother of Joseph, Jesus' adoptive father, then Alphaeus' son, the Apostle James, would be a cousin of Jesus. Jesus, of course, has no problem remembering his apostles' names. But can you remember them? One help is to remember that there are 2 named Simon, 2 named James, and 2 named Judas. Simon Peter has a brother Andrew, and James son of Zebedee has a brother John. That is a key to remembering the names of 8 apostles. The other 4 include the tax collector Matthew, one who later doubts Thomas, One called from under a tree Nathanael, and Nathanael's friend Philip. 11 of the apostles are from Galilee, Jesus' home territory. Nathanael is from Cana. Philip, Peter, and Andrew are originally from Bethsaida. Peter and Andrew in time moved to Capernaum, where Matthew apparently lived. James and John also live in or close to Capernaum, and they had a fishing business nearby. Judas Iscariot, who later betrays Jesus, seems to be the only apostle from Judea. Jesus chooses 12 apostles Mark 3. 13-19 Luke 6. 12-16 What serious decision does Jesus make after spending all night in prayer? Who are Jesus' apostles, and how may you be able to remember their names? 82. The 12 Apostles 34. The famous Sermon on the Mount Matthew 5. 1. 7. 29 Luke 6. 17-49 Jesus must be tired after spending the whole night in prayer and then choosing 12 disciples to be apostles. It is now day, but he still has the strength and desire to help people. He does so on a mountainside in Galilee, perhaps not far from his center of activity in Capernaum. Crowds have come to him from distant locations. Some are from down south, from Jerusalem and places in Judea. Others are from the coastal cities of Tyre and Sidon to the northwest. Why have they come looking for Jesus? To hear him and to be healed of their sicknesses. And that is just what happens. Jesus is healing them all. Think of that. All the sick ones are healed. Jesus also ministers to those troubled with unclean spirits, people who are afflicted by the wicked angels of Satan. Luke 6. 17-19 Jesus next finds a level place on the mountainside and the crowd gathers around. His disciples, especially the 12 apostles, are probably nearest to him. All are eager to hear from this teacher who is able to perform such powerful works. Jesus delivers a sermon that clearly benefits his listeners. Since then, countless others have also benefited from it. We can too because of its depth of spiritual content presented with simplicity and clarity. Jesus draws on ordinary experiences and things familiar to people. This makes his ideas understandable to all who are seeking a better life in God's way. What key aspects of Jesus' sermon make it so valuable? Who are truly happy? Everyone wants to be happy. Knowing this, Jesus begins by describing those who are truly happy. Imagine how this captures the attention of his listeners. But some things must puzzle them. He says, "Happy are those conscious of their spiritual need, since the kingdom of the heavens belongs to them. Happy are those who mourn, since they will be comforted. Happy are those hungering and thirsting for righteousness, since they will be filled. Happy are those who have been persecuted for righteousness' sake, since the kingdom of the heavens belongs to them. Happy are you when people reproach you and persecute you for my sake. Rejoice and be overjoyed." Matthew 5. 3-12 What does Jesus mean by saying happy? He is not referring to being jovial or mirthful, as when one is having a good time. Genuine happiness is deeper. It involves real contentment, a sense of satisfaction and fulfillment in life. Jesus says that people who recognize their spiritual need, who are saddened by their sinful condition, and who come to know and serve God are the truly happy ones. Even if they are hated or persecuted for doing God's will, they are happy because they know that they are pleasing Him and that He will reward them with everlasting life. Many people, though, think that being prosperous and pursuing pleasures are what makes one happy. Jesus says otherwise. Drawing a Sermon on the Mount, where does Jesus give his most memorable sermon, and who are present for it? What makes Jesus' sermon so valuable? Who are truly happy, and why? 35-85 Contrast that must make many of his listeners think, he says. Woe to you who are rich, for you are having your consolation in full. Woe to you who are filled up now, for you will go hungry. Woe, you who are laughing now, for you will mourn and weep. Woe whenever all men speak well of you, for this is what their forefathers did to the false prophets. Luke 6. 24-26 Why do having riches, laughing in delight, and enjoying praise from others bring woe? Because when someone who's and cherishes these things, Serving God may be neglected.